All right, Jean, I'm just going to do my introductions and we'll get started.
Okay, should I record now or you?
I just hit record.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, folks, welcome. Welcome to Earth Day Every Day. I am Michelle Backus with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. I am thrilled to see that so many of you are with us this evening. I'm going to do some quick introductions and then hand it over to our main speaker tonight. As I just want to let you all know that we are recording this session this evening and it will be available on our Earth Day Everyday website. So quick overview of who we are. As I said, I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension, and that is part of the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station at Rutgers University. And we are the outreach arm of the university. We're a partnership between the university and the counties that we serve. So there is a Rutgers Cooperative Extension office in every county in New Jersey. So you can reach out to your local cooperative extension office with any problems that you may have. And this particular Earth Day Everyday webinar series, we started this series last year, right at the beginning of COVID in April, because we wanted to let folks know about the environmental actions that they can be doing at home, what best practices they can be adopting at home to make their homes more environmentally friendly, inside the home, outside the home. And we are thrilled that it's been so popular. Tonight we are using Zoom to get you this information. So I know a lot of people are already familiar with Zoom, but you can go ahead and send me your questions via the chat box, and we'll be sending those questions to Jean at the end of the session. So hopefully you can all see where the chat box is. If you're on a computer, it's at the bottom of the screen with a little call out box. Everyone tonight is muted on entry, and you probably can't share your video or anything like that. I also wanted to let you know that we will be doing at the end of the session a poll. Just ask you some questions about what you thought of the session, and then also see what practices that you're going to adopt. So look for that poll about 10 minutes before the end of the session. Jean, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide, the consent slide.
You see?
Good. Okay, great. So also want to let you know that Rutgers University considers you all now research subjects, and we are required by human subjects compliance at Rutgers University to make sure to tell you that this is part of a research project. And part of that research project is that we will be asking you those poll questions, and then we'll probably follow up with you in about 6 months to find out what actions that you adopted. Okay, so without further ado, I am so happy that Gene Huntington is with us this evening, and he is the lead consultant at Steward Green and the former director of research and natural resources at Duke Farms. And we were also discussing earlier that he helped start a program that's very near and dear to my heart, to Amy's heart, the Rutgers Environmental Stewards Program. And tonight he's going to be talking to you all about deer management. Let's not pass the buck, deer management in New Jersey. All right, and you can take it away, Gene.
Thanks, Michelle.
No
and
problem.
Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight during your dinner hour. Appreciate that. I'm going to be moving fairly quickly through this presentation, and I'll probably say things too quickly. So I'm going to try to leave a lot of time at the end for some discussion. So anyway, this also is not a technical presentation. Just wanted to say that up front. For that, I mean, we do that kind of thing, but tonight I just really want to have kind of a discussion on deer management and how we approach it. I will dig into the weeds a bit with data collection because I think that's important. It's all important, but that's kind of my specialty. So I'm going to be covering habitat regeneration, a 5-step process that we did develop at Duke Farms, and we still continue to this day. Case study tonight is about mostly Duke Farms, although I will touch on other programs in Maryland. and then data collection, management strategies, and implementation. Most important step is going to be the follow through. We'll talk about that and then have time for discussion. So we all know the issues with a density of deer that's too high. And I want to say, you know, when the density is too high. Now, I've only seen one case in New Jersey where deer are not too high, but you know, the more we manage, the more we can have things in check. But we know there's vehicular accidents, and that is a concern. And occasionally we do have fatalities. I don't have to tell you that. Lyme disease, I've had that twice, and some of you may have had experience with that. It's not a fun thing. And why do we blame the deer for that? Well, they do carry the ticks, and they do get it around. And also they eat habitat for species like ground nesting birds that eat ticks, or they also eat ticks. Diseases in deer, blue tongue and EHD and other things are, hopefully don't get chronic wasting disease here in New Jersey, but there's always concern, and it's one state over right now in Pennsylvania, so it's a concern. Agricultural losses are huge, and we don't always see that firsthand because we still go to the grocery store or the farmer's market and we're still picking up things, but the farmers really suffer, and we suffer too. And on the end of that, and so there's a lot of our agricultural crop damage from an over-densified deer population. Forest ecology is negatively impacted, and so ecosystem services are impacted in that our soils, our water, our vegetation, air is all negatively impacted. And you might say, well, how does that happen? And increased erosion and sedimentation occurs when plants are eaten that don't have the root structure to hold those soils in place, and that happens. It's happening all the time. You've seen it everywhere. You just might not know that that's why. And species displacement, which I've just touched on earlier, when deer get to a point where they're over-densified and we allow that, again, what we might not be seeing happening. I mean, I love deer. I love to photograph deer. I love to watch their habits. I've always loved that ever since I was a kid. And so harvesting deer is the last thing I want to do for management. But the other thing I don't want to see is other species displaced. And so ground nesting birds really don't have a home in New Jersey when deer are over-densified. The habitat's gone. And so if they can't nest, and I'm talking about like grouse and ovenbirds and other species, they don't have a home, and some of them are being extirpated from the state. It's kind of sad. But then other species really don't have homes either, or foraging habitat. So our case study tonight is about Duke Farms, and I'm touching on points with this, but here's the summary slide. I'm just going to give this to you up front. It's basically due diligence was done at Duke Farms to satisfy, what could be done, and some things that were kind of crazy. Like I wrote here, the trap and transfer program. Over 300 deer were trapped and transferred off from the property in 2 years. That's kind of like over the top. And when you think about what the costs are to some of this, we captured deer, but it was costing $2,200 a deer to do that when you included all the costs, and that's not feasible. Data collected annually, that was important to be knowing what our numbers were at Duke Farms. And then we set goals. We had set a 5-year stretch goal to get from 300 deer per square mile, which was the highest density ever recorded at that time, to about 10 to 15 deer per square mile within 5 years there. A goal we met at year 4, by the way. Property was divided into manageable sections, saturation hunt on 3 square miles with 70 qualified participants, not calling them hunters because it's not a hunting program. It was a research project and a management program. 1 square mile with a qualified sharpshooter, And the first season in 2 weeks, 604 deer were harvested. Again, this is after knowing what our numbers were, half by the sharpshooter, half by the participants. And then since then, we've changed up the program as necessary, less hunters, sections, etc. And 14 tons of venison went to the food banks in New Jersey. That's a great thing when we have to do something like this, is at least have something good come out of this, besides all the other benefits of better habitat and improving ecosystem services, reducing traffic accidents and agricultural loss. And the habitat is coming back there, and the species are thriving. For those of you who know Duke Farms, you've seen it. So the due diligence, part of it was trap and transfer. We looked at fertility drugs. Rutgers was doing a program with that, where we would tranquilize deer, inject them with fertility, anti-fertility drugs, and then release them. We lost a few deer just in the tranquilizing of that, and then fencing was used, and repellents and deterrents. And I guess one of the things when we're looking at fencing and repellents and deterrents, or even trap and transfer, which we can't do anymore in this state, we're just really pushing the problem onto somebody else. They're expensive and just really not taking care of the issue. And fertility, contraceptions, things like that really hasn't gotten to the point yet where we can effectively and efficiently use them. And so we're waiting for the day that does come, though. Could be an option. So data was collected annually we were using FLIR studies. And since 2001, been collecting that data. So we've got a good data set there. Other ways of observing, an over-densified deer population. You can see the herbivory and the seedling counts. We can see right through the forest floor. When you can do that, we know that, if there's no understory, there's too many deer. Or something's, maybe there's a mower that mowed it all, but in this case, it was the deer. Trail cam counts can be used. We use FLIR studies, forward-looking infrared from airplanes and helicopters. And so that would be part one of this 5-step habitat regeneration. Step one being we collecting our data, creating a baseline study, not doing what I call analysis paralysis, where we're collecting everything and then not doing anything, but collecting enough data to have enough information to get us started. And then we move into fauna management. And that's not just a deer management program. That's also protecting endangered species, nesting bald eagles. There's over 30 species at Duke Farms alone currently that are either threatened or endangered that utilize that property. Then it's going into the flora management, invasive flora, and also again, protecting flora that needs to be protected. There's a regenerative stage. And then we get to the most important stage, and that's the maintenance, the monitoring, the follow through. And if you've heard me talk about this before, it's like when we buy a house or a car, or even when we get married, the first day we do that is the best, right? It's exciting. We've bought that house, or we're excited, or we bought that new car. I don't buy new cars, but or we got married and just really excited about that. And then kind of the work begins, right? In order to keep that car nice, to keep that house nice or property, or to stay married happily, we've got to work on those things. We've got to constantly stay committed and work on those things. And this is no different. Habitat regeneration is no different than that. So then step two would be moving into fauna management, as I just said. And I'm going to dig a little deeper now into fauna data collection. And now we don't use the airplanes and helicopters to do it anymore. they're not safe, they're expensive, and quite frankly, the data is not as good, the data sets, because the technology is getting so good now with the drones, the UAS, that unmanned aerial systems, that that's what we're using. And so these are some of the studies we're working on for Rutgers and Princeton and New Jersey Farm Bureau and other states like Montgomery County in Maryland and now Arlington, Virginia. And this is kind of how you break areas down. These are parks in Maryland that they want to have studies done on. And so here's 5 parks we're looking at just north of DC. 5 more parks. And this is kind of what it starts to look like over New Jersey. These are areas we did for the New Jersey Farm Bureau, or that they had done. And then we start looking at our breakdowns once we've collected and analyzed the data, and then maps are produced. And we finally have a tool that actually gives us some good data to start moving forward with. And then we know, is the density higher than what's acceptable or not? This is an example of Arlington County, Virginia, and breaking that down into sections that are divided by major highways and roads and barriers. And then taking those sections and creating launch points for the drones. So we want to collect the data in one swoop so that we're not allowing the deer to be moving around, and we don't want double counting happening. And so we have ways and methodology to prevent that. These are some of the systems, and this is an example of the information that gets supplied to FAA, TSA, in this case, Homeland Security. And here's a little quiz for those of you playing at home. How many deer do you see? I'm going to play the video. Hopefully you can see the video. Well, you don't see any deer because these are turkeys. You see some raptors flying in the background there up over the horizon. This is in Brookhaven, Long Island. And what we see here are turkeys. I want to just point out that, I wanted to show you this because, we can see a lot of different types of species. So we want to make sure we know what we're looking at. We're using qualified either wildlife biologists who know what they're doing, or people with many, many years of experience like myself in this. Here we have cattle. Okay, so we can see that these heat signatures that we're seeing with the thermal camera, the infrared, are actually cows, and both of those are pretty low. Okay, and now we're looking at deer again at Brookhaven, and we are pretty low, and we see them moving. And what I want to point out here is the technology is getting so good now that you actually see the digestive tracts on these deer. Not that you want to, but look at, so we get a little closer to the deer, we can start to see what's warmer inside the deer. Not that we want to, but all I'm pointing out is that the technology is getting so much better now. So this is what it looks like from about 400 feet in a field with an oblique angle on the camera, looking at deer from 400 feet in the woods. We do this, we like to have our data collected from about, in this part of the Northeast, from about Thanksgiving until maybe the middle of April, end of April. We don't want the leaves on the deciduous trees if we can help it. Here we have other species. We've got a Homo sapien playing with 2 dogs, a small one and a large one. And we know this not from the still so much as we do the context and also the video. Here we have a deer standing on the edge of the woods. But here's a seep coming out of the field. So spring water going into the field. This is Watchung Burrow, and taking the areas, like I said, the launch and landing points, and dividing that up so we can collect data systematically over Watchung Burrow in one session. And so the methodology, we like to do it at night because we've got a contrast from the heat signatures on the ground and what's walking on the ground. So the ground gets a little cooler, and that helps us see things clearly like that. And then a trained biologist or somebody who really can understand the differences between a species, other ungulates such as cattle, horses, sheep, but then the smaller mammals, fox, raccoon, coyotes, we don't want to count them into our studies. These are 3 horses. Watch them. There's 3 deer. One's laying down. And here we see some scale, right? So we've got cars parked in a driveway, 2 deer laying down in front of the cars in the yard. And we know that those are deer from scale. Here, I'm just showing this because we've got 2 smaller species. These are not deer. You see moving down, see my cursor. These are rabbits. 3 deer and a street light. So there's other heat signatures that we have to be cognizant of. And here again, we've got, I think, rabbits. And I don't think we need to do rabbits again, but we were asked by New Zealand if that's possible. 3 deer in the backyard with other heat signatures like the chimney and lights but then again, some people are concerned, well, is this an invasion of privacy? With a thermal camera, we're not able to see into any of the houses or anything like that. And also we're not hovering over houses. We made sure that the technicians are not doing that. Manual flights allow for, hovering and zooming in and just kind of seeing what is happening behind maybe a grove of spruce trees or a house. And this is, again, this is an area of Hutchinson Memorial Forest, breaking it down into the areas we're going to fly out of. And then this is what the actual pattern looks like for flying. And what you can't see here is that every drone angle here, looking out and looking out over these fields. So it's not just straight on that pattern. We don't do those transect flights anymore. We used to when we hired airplanes to do that, but that just gives you a plan view and you miss things. So again, we're flying about 400 feet above ground, and that gives us accurate mapping, and we're using Esri data collector as we're out there. So we're actually mapping where the deer are as we're collecting the data. That's become a game changer too. And then the information goes into charts and like tables like this. And then this happens to be Montgomery County, Maryland. Interesting, as we were talking earlier, they are managing their deer populations with their park police. So once they know that their population is high, they are putting together management plans, like I'm going to talk about in a minute, and they're using their park police to sharpshoot. And so the park police are getting their sharpshooting credits, and it's done very safely, and they haven't had any incidents in doing that. Again, they're donating venison to their food banks as well through the Northwest Cap program. It's a good example of what data looks like in the reports, and then the maps look like this. And so that gives us a tool to manage by. And now let's talk about strategies a little bit. Non-lethal considerations. We want to do that when we can and when it makes sense. So a lot of vegetable farmers either have to fence to keep deer out. And we fenced 1 square mile at Duke Farms as a test. And after we did that, we said we would not fence anymore because that's just pushing the problem onto others. But for those who have to protect their livelihood, like vegetable farmers, other farmers, soybeans, corn, they almost have to either have proper deer management or fence A lot of the feedback we're getting is that the deterrents are expensive and or just not really working effectively enough, especially after a large rain. It has to be reapplied. And so, a lot of our non-lethal considerations also are just expensive, and not that harvesting isn't expensive either. We'll talk about that. So when we move into a lethal action, bow and or firearms was effective at Duke Farms. And then community-based versus private. Now in a lot of your municipalities, community-based deer management plan is the way to go, and that's going to be sought out from New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife. And they will help lead down through that process. The problem has been that there's just not easy sometimes to navigate through. And so we still need better management plans in place, and we're going to keep pushing for that. Private is probably the easiest way to do our deer management. And so if we are able to hunt on our lands or allow others to hunt on lands or our farms, that's going to be our easiest way to do that. But there are issues with that too, as we'll discuss. When we do implement a program, we want to be partnering with our neighbors as best as possible, communicating very openly about what's happening, and remember safety first. And these programs have been very safe. We did not have one incident at Duke Farms, and it's very rare to have an incident with these things as long as they're carried out correctly. So the 5-year goal at Duke Farms, like as I said before, was to get from 300 deer per square mile. Then they had upwards to 300 deer per square mile to 10 to 15 deer per square mile. And we were able to accomplish that actually in year 4, which was really great. But then the work began to really maintain that. And so we had a saturation hunt with 70 qualified participants, and then 1 mile sharpshooter, like I talked about. The follow through really is where it happens. Now, some of the issues after doing this type of management, obviously we had pushback from extreme animal rights activists. A lot of the animal rights activists, I mean, I agree with, like, we want to protect animals. And I have a heart for wildlife, I really do, but I don't want to see things out of balance. And so a lot of the extreme animal rights activists, though, or some of them would, protest and push back, and that's expected to, and their opinion is valuable. And then on the other side of it, hunters would push back and say, "Oh, you're killing all the deer," and we've actually been able to show through the Duke Farms program that the deer are much healthier now that are on the property. When we first started harvesting the deer, we were collecting all kinds of data. We had about 25 research projects linked to this from Rutgers and Princeton and others. And the deer were 20% leaner, and some were starving, and some were diseased. And so now they have a much healthier herd that's allowing other species to come back, both flora and fauna, which is good. But then also on the other side of it, hunters who were afraid that there wouldn't be sport or good hunting. The program has proven that the racks are good. The male deer are really healthy. As female deer are healthy. Fecundity rates are, as you would expect. And it's just proven to be overall a healthier program. So anyway, keep moving. The follow through, is extremely important. And so what we did with the way we started to manage the follow through was to reduce the amount of sections, reduce the amount of the participants in the program, start focusing more on the biodiversity, and selecting participants that really understood that well or wanted to be a part of that, and not so much of a harvest. And been very successful in that, and it's hard to do this properly because you've got to have people that you can trust who will go out and do the work and not make it a their own deer hunt, if you will. And so it does have to be managed. The people do, and we had to ask some people to leave the program, some participants that weren't following the rules, because also we want it to be successful but safe and in control. Our numbers will tend to fluctuate. We experimented with bow only, had to reintroduce shotgun, and have done that in a way that everybody's communicated to effectively and know what's going on. And we've kept the number, or they now, I'm not there, but they've kept the number at 10 to 15 deer per square mile under the lead of Tom Almendinger. He's doing a really good job over there. So the habitat is coming back, and for Duke Farms, that's the most important thing, because they want to help others become informed stewards of the land. That's their mission. So okay, so what are next steps that we can do? I can't say this enough, but educate others on the issues and how to manage deer. Data collection, which I really got down in the weeds a bit on, we feel is very important, because without the data, how can you know how to manage it? Eventually what we hope to see in these studies is deer densities that are acceptable, and being able to lessen the pressure on the management end, and making that and being able to see ecosystem services, their qualities increase again, see vehicular accidents decrease. So we want to prioritize our management and select what types of management we're going to do based on the data. We want to plan our strategy and our timing and our budgeting, et cetera, according to that, and be most effective with what we can do. Do what we can with what we have. Implementation as it can be done, but then mostly the monitoring and follow through after we have an implementation program. And then again, kind of sandwich this with educate others on the issues and how to manage. So I know I ran through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to leave a lot of time for discussion, or for me to be able to answer questions. And so Michelle, I don't know if you want to lead me through those.
Sure, yeah, and if folks have questions, they can go ahead and put them in the chat to me, and I'll give you some of the ones that I have already. What is an appropriate deer population in New Jersey, and what are you seeing as far as deer population numbers in New Jersey?
Well, an appropriate, many scientists are saying and agree that 10 to 15 deer per square mile would be the appropriate number. And that's why I said we had a goal for 10 to 15 deer per square mile at Duke Farms. Mm-hmm. It was based off from the science that in a healthy habitat, 10 to 15 deer. Now that's not the case everywhere. Now deer have learned to adapt and will survive in the fragmented landscapes that we have left them with here in New Jersey. Okay. They will survive. But we're not seeing other species surviving, and therein lies the problem. So their carrying capacity may be larger than that, but 10 to 15 deer per square mile is what we're looking at when we're trying to bring up qualities in ecosystem services, forest ecology, and other species survival.
Okay. So some other questions that are coming in. What do you recommend for deer that are coming in on the home property? Either, I guess, how to deter those deer from coming into the home property?
That's a good question, because sometimes our properties and our homes aren't large enough to do a deer management program, right?
Mhm.
And so unless our community, so there's a kind of a two-step approach there, right? One is encourage our communities to do a community-based deer management plan. And then the other is just at home, we can use deterrents, but they're, some are more effective than others. The egg-based deterrents are pretty good. We tested some clay-based products that weren't so good. The thing with the deterrents is that you have to keep applying them. So you might get a light sprinkle or rain and might still be okay. But on your plants and your vegetables and stuff like that, you may have to keep applying them. And I don't like putting anything on my vegetables. Fencing, obviously, fencing is probably the best, thing that you can do at your home. And I'm not against fencing, except that it's expensive. Who wants to close the gate after you pull in and out every time in your driveway? But that's less now the last year. And then also, we're pushing the problem to our neighbors. So I put a fence up, and then my neighbor's like, thanks, now I've got your deer. And those deer, and they have a range of half a mile to sometimes male deer will travel 5 miles. So, it's just pushing the problem off on others.
Mhm. Okay.
But those are two things you can do. You can fence and use deterrents. For right now, those are the best things.
And any fence? I know there's certain.
We can plant deer resistant plants, and I'm a registered landscape architect who, we write these things for nurseries as to what deer eat and what they don't eat. The problem is that deer, when they get over densified, they don't read so well, and so they're basically eating everything. And so we saw at Duke Farms, and we've seen in other places where deer are starving to death. They're eating species that they shouldn't be eating. And I say shouldn't be eating, like they'll eat boxwood now. And Buxus sempervirens is not good for deer. It has no nutritional value for them. It's just roughage that goes through. It's not even good fiber for them because it can actually hurt them. So they are eating things that and I would too. If I was starving to death, I would eat just about it and probably eat my arm. So they're just trying to survive. And so you can plant things that are, the nursery says deer resistant, but a lot of times those things aren't working as well as we'd like them to work.
Okay, great. Well, not great, but thank you for answering that question.
I hear you.
Any idea what county has the highest concentration of deer per square mile?
I do. Any guesses, Michelle?
Well, let's see. Folks, do you want to put your guesses in the chat box? Which county in New Jersey do you think has the highest population per square mile?
Have them guess, and then you can ask me another question. We'll come back to that.
Okay. And then I have to hold on. I'm gonna try to. They're coming in hot. Okay, is New Jersey Forestry, I guess, New Jersey DP Forestry planning to do anything in our public lands? Is there any direction from the state?
From New Jersey Forestry?
From New Jersey Forestry, and then I would extend it to the state in general.
Yeah, so far everything's been kind of led by the Division of Fish and Wildlife of the state. And so that's one of the reasons I think the study I showed you about the Farm Bureau for the entire state, that's one of the reasons they're collecting data, is so that they can help others manage on a much larger level, which will mean maybe some bills will be introduced so that we can effectively manage. We can manage more effectively, I guess I should say. One example of that would be farmers can get deer depredation permits to manage deer.
Mm-hmm.
However, they can't get a depredation permit until they show the damage on the crop. And so by the time they've documented the damage on the crop, submitted that to get a depredation permit, applied for the permit, gotten the representative from Fish and Wildlife out to the farm, looked at the damage, and then approved the permit, the damage is done.
Mm.
So one change in policy might be better to allow farmers to just get deer depredation permits and manage and have annual inspections. That's, you know, just one type of thing, but I don't know if the Department of Forestry actually doing a deer management plan, but I could, because it's all handled by Fish and Wildlife right now. And then the way they handle it right now is through hunting licenses.
Okay.
And community-based plans that, you know, communities can do, and depredation permits that farmers can do.
Okay, so going back to the question about density, with Mercer and Monmouth, Hunterdon, a couple of people say Hunterdon, Monmouth, Ocean County. A lot of people are saying Monmouth, Ocean County, Morris County. It's all over the place. Bergen, Union.
So, except for Bergen and Union, yes, all of those counties are very high in density. Mercer, Monmouth, Burlington, Cumberland, Somerset, Morris. Nobody said Warren, but actually
I believe
Warren's
we had one Warren. I believe we
Okay.
had one.
Well, that person's correct. Warren's the highest right now.
Wow. Okay.
As far as the areas sampled that we've seen from the studies, Warren had the highest densities. Doesn't mean that they have the highest amount of deer for the whole county. In fact, I doubt they do with the bear population that they have also. They have two problems. But Somerset was very high. And when you look at accident statistics, Hillsborough in 2017, Hillsborough Township in Somerset County was the highest. But there are areas in Montgomery, Mercer County, around Princeton, Hopewell, down in Cumberland. I mean, they all have high accident rates. So that's another way to, you know, kind of like understand what's happening out there.
Okay. Okay. More questions coming in. What do you recommend in terms of educating the public about management methods and eliminating some of the negative perceptions around deer management?
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot of negativity around one, just taking a life, right? So if we're harvesting deer, we're taking an animal's life. And so I think that that's, you know, how do you educate about that? But however, when we look at how our food is produced and, you know, when we talked when we did some surveys at Duke Farms, a lot of children didn't know where, you know, food from the grocery store came from. It comes from the grocery store. That's all they know. And so a lot more of these farm to fork programs are really good. And then educating people on overall where food comes from and you know, that burger you're eating didn't really, you know, so everything kind of relates. When we're talking about harvesting venison for food banks, I think that's a good way to educate people on how that happens. And I think also there's a negative connotation with the, you know, using firearms or bow archery to manage deer, and that it's not safe. That's just a fallacy. That's the research shows that it is a safe approach to managing deer and other species. Hunting has been proven safe. You know, there's training that hunters go through to get their licenses in every state. It's not just, you know, they just don't hand out guns and licenses and say go shoot things. So you know, but a lot of people who don't understand that side wouldn't know that. They wouldn't know that there's a process to all that to keep things safe, right? And still, just like with everything, accidents still happen, but it's very low for that type of thing. And I think because people take it very seriously. So there's a negative connotation with that needs to be educated that no, the numbers actually show that it is a safe approach. And there's other negative things that can come with it. Maybe just even like with farmers wanting deer managed to help with their crops so that the crops aren't damaged. Well, they've got to allow people on their farms to be able to manage deer. And so there's a negative connotation with, well, I don't know you, so I'm not going to allow you on. So there's ways to educate people so that they understand how that process works for vetting people and having background checks done and ways to trust people. Communication is going to be key to this.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of questions. Can you name some of the species of flora and fauna that have returned since conducting the deer management in any of the areas you've worked?
Yeah. So now we're getting into the good stuff. So we go to, if you're familiar with Duke Farms, you go back there, you won't see hundreds or thousands or even hundreds of thousands, but if you go around, you'll see millions of species that are coming back. And that's really exciting. Yeah. And so we are seeing our native tree populations regenerate. We're seeing understory for the first time in decades. And the species we're seeing our oaks and, our white oaks, red oaks. I could get species specific, or Quercus ruba or Quercus albus, that kind of thing. But we're seeing black gum, sweet gums coming back, hickory, maples, and then our shrub layers, we're seeing spice bush come back. That's, I love spice bush when we're out.
Me too. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's amazing. When you're around it,
yeah.
And it's exciting. We're seeing the shrub layer come back, the viburnums, some of the silky dogwoods, stuff like that. Depends on, the wet areas versus the upland. And then on our meadows, we're seeing meadows be able to hold their own with less management. Now, we saw kind of a 6-year trajectory on the management effort needed to happen when you're managing that 5-step program. So once you get things kind of set and you're into that monitoring phase after fauna and flora management, we're seeing the effort needed to manage invasive species come down. Mm-hmm. Now, other species we saw come back aren't so good. When we lowered the deer density at Duke Farms, for example, out in our agricultural fields, we saw multiflora rows jump out of the ground. And we didn't foresee that. And the reason that happened was because deer will eat the new growth on multiflora rows, and they love it. They won't eat the older species because it's too thorny and too rigid.
Oh, okay.
So they'll eat the new growth. And so that was one of the negative things that we did see, but we did manage that too.
Okay. And for folks who are listening, if plants are not your thing, multiflora is an invasive exotic shrub, and that's all over New Jersey, that will soon be going to flower, and you will see how pervasive it is throughout the state.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is so great to hear about all those plants coming back. Okay, so more questions. Are there methods and success stories in more densely populated areas of the state? I also work in Union County, and I know there's been some good deer management there for years.
Yeah,
for example.
There's some good efforts being done, and of course I'm just touting Duke Farms tonight. There are some good efforts being done, and all around the state, and up in Warren, there's been good effort, and in different parts of the state, yes, in Union. I'm not as familiar with those programs, and I know that there has been a lot of pushback on some of the programs, which I would go back to saying it all, really stems from education and communication, and setting good goals and getting good teams in place. But I can't really point to any one program and say, you gotta go see that one over there. I will say you could see it at Duke Farms when they reopen on April 1st, because, I'm familiar with that one. So,
Okay.
and the effort that we're seeing down in Maryland has been very good too. And I know that's not local to anybody here in New Jersey, but some people get down there. What they're doing is probably going to become more of a model for the country. Because think about it, if we have, let's not even say 300 deer per square mile like they had at Duke Farms. Let's say you have 150 deer per square mile and you're trying to get that 10 times lower, to get to 15 deer per square mile. If you take 20 deer out, that sounds like a lot of deer on maybe a large farm or farms. So if you take 20 deer per square mile down in a season, well, without fawning, you're still at 120 deer per square mile.
Mhm.
It's still a lot of deer.
Right. Okay. Take a quick, guys. I'm going to launch the poll. Okay, so those are you out there. I'm going to launch the poll. You can get started on that. We're about 10 minutes before we're going to probably end the session. So hopefully that came up on your screen. Okay, more questions. How many fawns can a single deer birth per year? And then also, what is the life expectancy of a deer?
Well, that's going to depend on their, on their population. And so the higher densified herds don't live as long. And I'm not the expert on this. I'm going to say that up front, but we did see at Duke Farms, the average deer were about four and a half years old. The older deer. So they were 2 to 4 to 4.5 years old. And they were fawning at rates of 1 to 3 fawns per season.
Per season, okay.
Season.
Okay.
And I can say this from experience when we did the trap and transfer program, and also when we did the injections for birthing rates to reduce, to prevent birthing. That was not a good process because you had to tranquilize the deer. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like seeing that, because that's not something that every deer comes back from.
Okay.
I'll just say it that way.
Okay. You mentioned chronic wasting disease in Pennsylvania. Do you know how large the problem is in central New Jersey? And also, would one get CJD by eating venison?
So I don't think that that's an issue for us to consume the venison, but there's just to make it clear, there are no cases that we know of CWD or chronic wasting disease in New Jersey.
Okay. Just moving through these, what are the top species negatively impacted by deer overpopulation? And we could even extend that to, that's one particular question, but we probably could even extend that to what is the, greatest ecological impacts from deer impacts in New Jersey. There's probably not just one top species.
You went from
right
one extreme to the other there.
Right.
So I think that, when we think about ecosystem services, there's a lot that we don't see happening when we have an overdensified deer herd or population. So you're going to see the things you're not going to see are the things I talked about before, like the ground nesting birds, dissipating from the state. Some have been extirpated from the state. We don't see that on a day-to-day, unless we're an ornithologist or avid birder or hunter even. We're not really seeing the grouse leaving the state or the ovenbirds. But that's important. We're not seeing the water quality, although sometimes we do see it, we just don't understand it. When we see the erosion that we see on the stream banks and rivers, that's attributed to vegetation not holding those banks in place. And that's not all, I'm not going to blame that all on the deer, but without the vegetation in place, we can't have those stream banks holding, right? So that's a huge issue that I don't think a lot of people understand. I don't think a lot of people understand the species displacement. Now you can see visibly the herbivory. So you can see when you drive past forests, you can see there's no understory. If you can see into a forest land or a woodland, 100 feet, that's too much herbivory.
Right.
But we don't know that because it's all we've seen, the common person. So that's one way to kind of gauge, like if there's too many deer ravishing the woodlands, if you can see into the woodlands, that's too many. And then a lot of people say, well, there's shrubs there. Well, yeah, there's basically Japanese barberry, multiflora rose, and Japanese stiltgrass. It's just, and garlic mustard and all those are species that are all invasive, people. So those are not what we want there.
Right.
And so they don't provide habitat for those other species that we'd like to see. We even saw, we did not see rabbits that we should be seeing at Duke Farms, chipmunks, just because they didn't have a habitat.
If folks want to see a great example of what a forest should look like, Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve in New Hope, Pennsylvania has done a great job. And that is where we take people there on field trips just for them to understand, here's truly what a forest understory is supposed to look like. You're not supposed to.
And Bowman's Hill is fenced.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yes.
It is.
I just want to point that out. So
Right.
They have done a great job, and I commend what they've done, but it is fenced. The part that's doing well, and so just to make note of that. But yeah, no, that is a good example of forest ecology in check.
Right. Okay. Just moving through some more of these questions. Some question about the name of the egg-based deterrent.
About what?
You had mentioned an egg-based deterrent for deer in people's yards.
Yeah, they used, I don't know the brand names, but there used to be something called Chew Not, and there's other things out there, but the egg-based, and you can make them at home. But it's the egg-based ingredient is what smells bad and deters the deer, and I would say me, from wanting to go near that shrub.
Okay. Another good question here, I think. Have you seen, do you know of good examples of neighboring towns cooperating on an organized hunt?
Yeah, we see it, and I'll, for the sake of time, I'll mention what happened at Duke Farms. So at Duke Farms, we put a management program together. We partnered with Hillsborough Township, which most of Duke Farms is in, Hillsborough Township. And then we also partnered with Manville, which was close by, and Somerset County, which Hillsborough is in, Somerset County, and then the state. After partnering like that, we saw the 600, and what I didn't mention was 604 deer at Duke Farms, but 1,000 deer, was just over 1,000, close to 1,100 deer harvested at Duke Farms and the immediate area, because Somerset County initiated a management program at Duke Island Park right across the river that year. Hillsborough initiated their first deer management program that year. And so it was really a good effort, and they kept that partnership up, which is good. It's helping the communities. So that kind of program is what I'm talking about.
Okay. So some folks have questions, a couple of questions here on how, when you have encountered pushback from animal rights activists, what was effective for dealing with those complaints?
We noticed that we would have public meetings to educate the community on what we were going to do. We didn't have to have public meetings from a private property, but we wanted to because we wanted to use it as a demonstration. At the public meetings, sometimes an extreme animal rights activist might solicit a team to come in with them, I'll say. And this happens now online a lot with the projects. And so sometimes the people that they're soliciting aren't even from that community. They can be from, somewhere around the country. We got an actual death threat from somebody in Washington, D.C. At Duke Farms. It's, crazy. So anyway, the more we talked about what was really happening in the landscape, especially with species displacement and ecosystem services, disease, the health of the deer, that sort of thing, and the science behind that, the more people would come to us after the meetings and say, I didn't want deer management, but I didn't know about these other things that were occurring. And I am an environmentalist, and I do care about the environment and ecology and ecosystem services. So now I understand it. And so we saw a lot of just educating helped a ton in the public meetings.
Okay.
Which can be done differently today. We're not having in-person meetings, obviously.
Okay, speaking of educating, another question here. Wouldn't making sterilization and fertilization happen be well, as it's phrased here, be the smart thing to do? Otherwise, you create a perpetual cycle of killing since deer rebound. What is your?
If I understand the question right,
Yes.
You're saying wouldn't fertility and contraception be the way to go?
Mm-hmm. That's what they're asking. Since
I would think it would be perhaps one day if it were effective and affordable.
Mm-hmm.
But right now it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not, and I've worked with the people that are working on these things. So so far I would be a proponent of that in certain situations if it did work, but right now it's not feasible. And as I said before, to tranquilize and inject a deer or perform surgery on them, it's just not feasible. It's not. It doesn't make sense. And when you think about the numbers of deer out there, even if you got it down to $1,200 a deer, how can towns afford to do that? They can't. People can't afford it. But I think that one day there may be something that would be introduced into the food supply or something like that. Maybe that would work, but it's not there yet.
Okay. So another question. Curious to know the steps that occur to donate venison to food banks. Are there participating butchers in the program, and how is it distributed?
So that's a great question. To use that program, there has to be the venison has to be butchered by a certified butcher that's certified by NORWESCAP to accept the meat into the food banks. So there's, I want to say, less than 10 in the state. And so there is a list of them. And you find a certified butcher that's in your area, and then you bring the deer to them, you just drop it off, and so if there's money in a program called Hunters Helping the Hungry, then they might offset the cost. Currently, there has been a huge cost offset that was initiated by Fish and Wildlife and Farm Bureau to offset those costs. But otherwise, a lot of the butchers will do a reduced fee for the hunter or whoever's bringing the deer in, and then process that deer at a reduced fee, and then that can go to the food banks.
Okay, that's
But it
great.
can't be, you can't process it at home or a butcher that's not certified with Norwest Cap.
Okay. Okay. So when there's so many questions, there's so many questions.
Maybe
But maybe we'll
maybe
make,
there'll be a way to take some of the questions and answer them through
yeah, we can
an
always follow up. We
email
can,
format or something later. I don't know.
right. But maybe we'll make this one our last question. And it's a question about deterrence on home property. Is it true that urine and hair deter deer from yard? And also any opinion on the companies for like deer out yard companies that claim if they spray, they'll keep deer out of the yard? Do you know any sort of efficacy on that?
Yeah, so I've tried the hair and urine products and things like that, and other deterrents, I think, and then the companies that promote them, I think are effective. What I said before was that I just think that it's an added cost that becomes repetitive after each major rain event. And so, and I'll say this too, when I've tried the deer or to repel deer with hair, human hair, which I don't even have anymore, used it all on deer. When I've tried that in the past, the density that we have, it didn't really affect. And we even had an electrified fence. It was a Rutgers spec fence in the day back in the 90s. And I would spec a different fence for today. And Rutgers is also a mesh fence, but we spec'd a fence, electrified it, put peanut butter on the wires so the deer would actually touch it and learn that was an electric fence and then avoid it. You know, that's an old method for cattle as well. And the cows were a bit smarter. The deer would, or maybe the deer were, because the deer would start to time it and actually run through the fence or over it.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it was ridiculous. So
Wow. All right.
I hope that's been helpful. And I appreciate
This-
everybody that came tonight.
Yes. And I really appreciate how you left so much time for questions. We haven't done something like that before, but I think it's a really great really great format. Jean, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us this evening on Earth Day. Every day you're getting lots of thank yous and great program, very informative and appreciative. If you haven't already filled out the poll, I'm going to end it in just about a minute, so finish that up. So also I had put in the chat box that if you are feeling generous, these programs are free, but you feel free to make a donation to support the Rutgers Environmental Steward Program, stewardship internships and scholarships. I also want to let you know that you can join us also next week, March 29th, same time, 6:30 for get this, Are You Wildlife Wife Spring Babies, tips for helping injured or orphaned wildlife. So Kathleen Kerwin, who is with the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Wildlife Conservation Management Program, will be with us and we'll be showing lots of adorable pictures of baby animals, baby wildlife. So who doesn't want to see that? You can sign up on our website if you haven't already. I'm glad to see so many people made it in this evening. I'm glad we've kind of dealt with some of those Zoom issues. And thank you again, Jean and Amy and Steve for being in the background. And we will see everybody next week.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.